Hello, happy month of April. Yay. It is time for the Lit Gals. We are excited to be with you today. Anna and April and I are all happy to be here once again this month. So I don't think we need to introduce ourselves now. I think we're on episode 4. Look at us go. That's exciting. So, ladies, audiobooks and ebooks, such a popular topic. Tell me what you think of them. Do you count them towards your reading goals? Do you use them? What are your thoughts about audiobooks and ebooks, either personally or from a classroom setting? You could go either direction.
You know, Martie, it's very interesting. When the pandemic started, then a lot of people started listening to audiobooks, right? And picking up ebooks, if you will. And it was also very enlightening for my own self. It was a time that I started upping my game, if you will, for audiobooks and ebooks. And this is a very interesting thing that came up. When it comes to nonfiction, a self-help book, or I love listening to an audiobook, and I don't mind an ebook at all. But when it comes to fiction, I couldn't do it. My mind wandered. You know what I mean? I lost my place. It was really interesting. So I just started doing more nonfiction when it came to ebooks and audiobooks.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, something you mentioned that I hadn't thought about was the pandemic, and wonder what that did to ebook numbers and audiobook numbers. That would be interesting to go back and look at, because you couldn't get to the library or the bookstore or, you know, even picking up a paperback at Walmart. So that would be interesting data to look at.
Very much so. Yeah.
So April, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's what's great, is that we have options, right? And I know that's how I use them in my life, is which form fits what I'm doing. And so if I'm traveling, then I'm on my ebook, I'm on my Kindle, so that I can take, you know, instead of packing 8 books in my suitcase that I think I'm going to read, they can just be on the slim Kindle. And so I love that option, and I'm a walker. And so if I can get books on ebook for that, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but sometimes I bring in some books. Once a year, I usually put Harry Potter on ebook and just re-listen, because I love it. And so I love that you can kind of pick what you need, but always got a book going, you know, on all the different things. And as far as my own reading goals, yes, I count it. I count everything. And for students, I would count everything too. I think I've been in a lot of debates about this. You know, my book club, we all do it differently. When we pick a book, people are saying, well, can I get it on ebook? Well, can I get it on Kindle? Because everybody does it differently. And I think we're all, I don't know if consuming is the right word, but we're all reading the book to me. So yeah, what do you think, Martie?
I totally agree with you that it doesn't, I think it's Kylene Beers, I think is where I got this phrase. She calls it reading with your ears.
Yeah.
And I love that, because you are experiencing the text that the author presented. You're just doing it with your ears. Now, I personally am not an audiobook person. Anna, I'm kind of like you. My mind wanders, and I'm like, especially fiction. I realized I'm, you know, half a chapter has gone by and I have no idea what was said. So I just don't do audiobooks at all. When I walk or run, I do podcasts. I'm just not an audiobook person, nor am I an ebook person. April, I am one of those people who put
packed 8 books
in her suitcase. I have been known to hoard up the paperbacks, so I only travel with paperbacks. I don't ever travel with a hardback book. And I've been known to leave books at free little libraries as I go.
That's nice.
So yeah, because I have nothing against ebooks. I owned a Kindle at one point in my life, and I just realized it's not for me. My husband's reading a book on his phone right now.
Oh, I couldn't.
No, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I am a hold it in your hand kind of
Turn
person.
the page.
But for my students, I never minded an ebook or an audiobook. And yes, I count them because it's reading with your ears.
Yep.
So April, one question though I wanted to ask, have you found a change? Have you found a shift with your own students since the pandemic?
They don't talk about reading too much.
Okay. Well, I just was wondering if they might have said,
But I think I've shared with you guys before, we do a lot of listening in class. And so that I am modeling for them, like this counts, we're going to read for homework and we're going to read out loud, but sometimes we're going to listen to somebody else. And that's just another skill that they also need. And I think a lot of students find I understood a lot more when I listened. And so just to show them different ways that they can get the information of the book, I think is great. Yeah. But as far as their personal reading habits, I'm not sure. They don't say much.
Just was wondering.
Okay. Well, transferring a little bit to our topic for today, it is April. It is my month. I was not born in April, the most common question I get in my life. But it is National Poetry Month. And so I hope to any teachers listening that you are able to incorporate some poetry lessons this month. We were chatting before the show. Use this as an opportunity to expose your students to all different kinds of poetry. And we have some great recommendations for you later in the show. But, let them see that poetry doesn't have to be straight and narrow, black and white, doesn't have to rhyme, doesn't have to be about love. I think so many students think that,
They do.
Doesn't have to be a Shakespearean sonnet that doesn't make sense. So use it as an opportunity. Sometimes in the classroom in the past, I've done poem a day, we don't even analyze it. We just read it. We just let it come into our bodies and our brains and think about it. So any suggestions from you two on that?
Well, something I did to kick off my poetry, I'm not a big fan of poetry. I will just admit it right here, which is very difficult as an English teacher to be the one in the room that's like, poetry is not my jam, because it's not. And so I had to figure out how to teach poetry 6 times a day that I did not hate. And so I figured out what that looked like for me. But the way I always started my poetry unit was with 3 poems, putting that in quotation marks on purpose, because what the students didn't know that I knew those were song lyrics. I used an Adele song, I used a Beatles song, and I used a U2 song, songs they did not know, and we looked at them as poetry. And then and it was so much fun. And we were just like, okay, what do you know about poetry? Let's see how it applies. And they would be able to pick up similes and metaphors and some rhyme and some basic poetry devices. And then I would hit play and let them hear, especially when it was the Adele song, because they knew her. And they were like, wait a minute, you mean this is poetry? And I'm like, you found those poetic devices, didn't you? And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, see, poetry is a part of your life every single day. You just need to adjust the way you think about it. And so I used that as my hook to help them realize it didn't have to be about love, and it didn't have to rhyme, and it didn't have to be by Shakespeare. And it is approachable, and it is a part of their life. So that was my hook to get them at least a little bit sucked in. Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, April, you had talked about Langston Hughes.
Yes.
And a couple of podcasts ago, or maybe it was just the 3 of us talking, I'm not quite sure when it was.
Who knows?
But it reminded me of a great big unit that we did on Langston Hughes, 7th grade. Fulton Junior High, which is now, I think, Chapel Hill Middle School or something like that. And so I would like to recite the one that I remember.
Love it.
So if it's okay, I'd like to do that. It's called Dreams, and it goes, hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is like a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams go, life is a barren field covered with snow.
I was saying it along with you in my head.
I am kind of patting myself on the back for remembering. Since 7th grade, I might add, and I'm not going to say how old I am, but I was like, oh, when you had said Langston Hughes, I thought, oh my gosh, dreams. But isn't that interesting how all the way back I can remember a unit. A unit of study from my 7th grade teacher, and I can still remember the poem. So that was one of those big things. You know what I mean? That was a very big aha. So Martie, kudos to you for saying I don't really like poetry, or it's but really going that extra mile and making sure that your students have a good unit of study on that. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm so glad you read Langston Hughes. He is, I was not exposed to him in middle school or high school, I don't believe. I found him later in my life, and he is my favorite poet. That's a favorite question that students ask, is who's your favorite poet? I don't have to think at all to come up with Langston Hughes. I love him. I love him.
Martie,
I'm so glad you read that.
Were you going to say a poem? I think
I am not going to share a poem. Ironically, though, it's kind of tying together
songs. On the hot spot or anything like
tying together songs and poetry. When I was in 7th grade, we had to memorize the Star Spangled Banner, all 5 verses of it. And yes, stand up and recite it in Mr. Stephen Meyer's kind so, when you stand at a ball game and they play the national anthem and you just kind of sing it in your head, I always sing the 5th verse because that's my favorite verse of the Star Spangled Banner. So I'm not going to go through it now. But I also have a 7th grade poetry memory. Yeah,
but that's great. That's great. Not to put you on the hot seat, April. But what is do you have a favorite poem or poet?
Man, I also have been so drawn to Langston Hughes, mostly because he just keeps showing up. He's a great partner text to so many things, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But he works for a lot of age groups. They're short. They are accessible vocabulary, accessible themes. So I am very drawn to him as well. I don't immerse myself in too much of it. I don't dislike it, maybe like on Martie's level, but I don't read it for pleasure. It's not a thing I would pick up, but for teaching purposes, I love Langston Hughes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of picking it up for pleasure, I'll just go ahead and talk about my book, Your Heart, My Sky, by Margarita, Engle. This is how I pick up poetry for pleasure. I pick it up as a novel in verse. So it tells the story of Lillian and Armando through poems. And I always tell students who think they don't like to read, pick up a novel in verse, because you turn pages fast. You feel there's not a lot of words on the page. You feel like you're getting the story quickly. And so this is a way I try to hook reluctant readers. But Your Heart, My Sky is probably the most recent novel in verse I've read. It's middle grade, And like I said, Lillian is the main female character, and Armando is the main male character. And there's a dog, and I'm not going to talk about the dog, but trust me, my only complaint about this book is there is not a dog on the cover, because there should be a dog on the cover. But what I found fascinating about this book is it's set in the 1990s, summer 1991, it says right inside the front cover. And I know growing up, I was born in the mid 70s, so tell you a little bit about how old I am. But in the late 80s and early 90s, you would often hear on the news about people coming from Cuba to the United States in rafts and like these makeshift boats, use that term very loosely. And I didn't understand why. This book goes into the why. It's a picture into what was going on in Cuba in the mid 80s to early 90s. So I picked up this book because it was a novel in verse, it was pretty, and that was kind of why I did it. Oh my goodness, I was not prepared for the amount I was going to learn about, it's not current events at this point, but modern history from this book. So have a whole new level of learning, and it's beautiful. Oh my goodness, the poetry in here, oh, it's so pretty. So there you go. There's my book recommendation, Your Heart, My Sky. Totally middle grade, like middle school appropriate. It's beautiful. But I would be totally remiss, ladies, if I did not bring to you my very favorite novel in verse writer. I've gotten to see her speak here in Indianapolis. She's a former middle school teacher. Her name is Elizabeth Acevedo, and this is called The Poet X. This is not her only book. You can't go wrong with any of them. I believe this was her first one. You can see it's got lots of gold stickers on the cover. But Elizabeth Acevedo, her poetry is beautiful. And she actually just shared on Instagram that she is now writing a screenplay of one of her newer books called Clap When You Land, which I really enjoyed also. But she was talking, it was neat to watch a writer talk about how hard it was to switch genres of writing. She's a poet. She identifies herself as a poet, and now she's trying to write a screenplay. And so she was super transparent yesterday or the day before in her post about how hard it is to switch. So I really appreciated her transparency. But
love that.
You can't go wrong with Elizabeth Acevedo. So she is more high school. 8th grade would be okay with this, but I wouldn't go much lower than 8th grade with her books. But high school, oh, they will eat her up. Yeah. So here you go. I was starting to talk about another one of her books. I'll just stop because I could fangirl all day over her books. So April, why don't you tell us what you brought to the table today?
Yes. So I have mentioned this before, Brown Girl Dreaming, I'm a Blurred Background by Jacqueline Woodson at our New Year's, at our New Year's special, our first one. And this is also novel in verse. My first experience with it, did it with my 8th graders, and they just loved it. And guess which poem is right on the opening? It is Dreams by Langston Hughes. She loves him. And it opens the novel, and later she has a poem where she's learning how to write poetry, and she mimics another of Langston Hughes's poems as a way to like feel the poetry in her hand as she writes and to hear it. And so she's a huge fan. The students did love, I said, do you guys realize you just read a 320-page book? We did that together, because they loved it. We were turning pages. We were reading a lot every day. They understood it. They could relate. It's from her child's perspective. So it sounds like a kid talking to them, but it's poetry. And we got to talk about poetic elements along with a million other things. She's growing up in the 60s and 70s. So we're talking about civil rights, and we're talking about racism, and we're talking about family and moving and so many things they could relate to. So highly, highly recommend.
I always tell people, this is one of the few books I would be willing to read again. I am a once and done book, but not this one. It's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
so beautiful. Yeah.
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 Maybe that was the book that got all the three of us together like this, huh?
Yeah.
I think that all of us loved that book so much that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited. The Lit Gals is going to take a little turn here. We're going to do something different. Anna and April are going to share a poem, do a reading of Joyful Noise. And I apologize. I don't know who wrote that. So I'll let one of you do a little intro.
Okay. So this is called Joyful Noise, Poems for Two Voices, and it's by Paul Fleishman. He also wrote the book Phoenix, which is another book for poems for two voices. And April and I are going to read Fireflies.
Ready when you are.
Okay. Light.
Light is the ink we use.
Night
Night,
is our parchment.
we're fireflies.
Fireflies.
Flickering,
Flitting.
flashing.
Fireflies. Glimmering.
Fireflies gleaming.
Glowing. Insect calligraphers.
Insect calligraphers.
Practicing penmanship.
Copying sentences.
Six-legged scribblers.
Six-legged scribblers.
Of vanishing messages.
Fleeting graffiti.
Fine artists in flight.
Fine artists in flight.
Adding dabs of light.
Bright brush strokes.
Signing the June nights.
Signing the June nights.
As if they were paintings.
As if they were paintings. We're
Flickering.
fireflies.
Fireflies.
Flickering.
Fireflies.
Fireflies.
Beautiful,
I love that.
Beautiful, beautiful, ladies. I loved it. I loved it.
I did this with a high school group. And we studied both of Paul Fleischman's poems for two voices. Just like yours, Martie, they could not get enough. They just couldn't get enough of this. They loved it. Yeah.
Poetry is such a great way to connect with students. And then when you turn them loose to write, that's a whole nother level of fun that is just beautiful. Oh, ladies, what a great show. I love our time together, sharing good reads, sharing interesting takes on things. We will be back on May 11th, which will be our final show for this school year. We're going to take off June and July. So we will then be back in August, but in May, we're going to tackle graphic novels. So that'll be much like poetry. It's a great way to bring readers to the table because it doesn't feel so hard. It feels, there's pictures, a lot of them. And so it feels approachable for our students, which is great. So ladies, thank you for a great time. Those of you watching, thank you for being a part of the Lit Gals. We appreciate you. We appreciate Keep Indiana Learning for giving us this time and space to do this. And we hope you will register for their summer conference. They have a number of those this summer. Their main conference is June 14th and 15th. Also, June 9th is the Reading Summit. And then in July, there are 2 math workshops. So lots going on at Keep Indiana Learning. So you can check out their website to learn more. So until next month, happy reading, and we will see you then.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.